and response from the District of Columbia. As a recap, the Office of the City Administrator, in response to the heavy rains on September 10th, 2020, which caused flooding in many neighborhoods and affected residents in the District of Columbia, the Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure, Lucinda Babers, is the designee for the City Administrator's Office and will also serve as a voting member on this task force. The Director of the Department of Energy, Tommy Wells, and the CEO of DC Water, David Gaddis, are chairs of this flood task force. The purpose of the flood task force as a whole is for the district to identify policies and projects that can adequately inform residents about the flood readiness while equitably protecting its residents and economy from the damage that floods can cause. A few weeks ago, on November 17th, the Flood Task Force kicked off a WebEx meeting, including 13 district agencies and 11 consulting members. Each task force member shared what success looks like in terms of flood management to contribute to this task force. In full coordination, this flood task force will develop a comprehensive and equitable action plan to address flood risk and to educate and engage communities on the issues of these risks. It will also identify equitable ways to reduce the risk of water damage from coastal, interior, and sewer backup from floods in the District of Columbia, as well as ways to reduce financial impacts of flooding on low and fixed income homeowners. The task force will prioritize the protection of vulnerable populations, maintenance in the district's affordable housing stock, increasing the district's housing supply in a safe and resilient manner, supporting ongoing economic development and mitigating disparities in real estate access and equity. All of these meeting proceedings are open to the public. Meetings and recordings will be posted to the Flood Task Force website in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. The schedule for the public listening sessions will be discussed a little later in the presentation. Today's Action Team meeting is being recorded. Only Action Team members and presenters will be able to participate in the conversation. The public will be muted. We ask Action Team members to please mute yourself when not speaking. And last and not most important, if you are experiencing technical difficulties, please reach out to Stephanie Pappas. We have dropped her information in the chat. And to present the Action Team goals and objectives, I'd like to hand it over to Nick Bonnard from DOEE. Nick?
Thanks, Kim. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, sorry for assuming it was somebody else's audio that was the problem. I got it all figured out now, but you can keep the slide deck up. Or am I supposed to be presenting?
We got it on this end. The slide deck is
okay. Great.
Right on the screen.
I'm actually not seeing the slides, but again, this might be me. Here we go. I see it now. Okay, perfect. Okay, so just spend the next couple of minutes trying to review what we're trying to do, both today, but in general with the action teams. And I think what you probably heard from Kim was we want to spend most of the time today actually having a discussion with everybody on the call, getting ideas, talking about them. But just as a little bit of setup, if you go to the next slide, we've got this is kind of the broad overview of how the action teams fit in with the task force. So if we just go to the top down, we've got the full task force, and then there are two action teams that kind of report back to the full task force. So today you're in the governance and coordination. Some of you may also be in the residential resilience action team meeting, which will occur this afternoon. And then within each of the action teams, there are action categories. So we went over those categories at the full task force meeting, but it's like flood insurance, mapping and modeling, sewer line backups, that kind of thing. And so there are 4 action categories within residential resilience and 5 in governance and coordination. And then ultimately, each action category is required to have at least one action plan. And that's really the goal that we're trying to get to, at the end of the task force. And then I think it's also worth pointing out in the structure here, the way we're kind of looking at what will happen in each of these meetings. So the task force is for voting and kind of reporting out from the action teams. The action teams will be a place where folks involved in all the different action categories can kind of see what's going on with other related categories, and there'll be discussion here and decisions on what should be presented to the full task force. And then there may be, for the action categories, there may be separate meetings or email chains that need to happen in order to kind of discuss what's happening with the action plan. So if you go to the next slide. So just as an example here, go back. Adria, can you go back one slide, please? Thanks. So just as an example, see the blue one, there you go. As an example of so action category 3, that one is floodproofing homes, and the lead here is DOE. And just to kind of provide the example, what that means is DOE is responsible for facilitating discussion around the category of floodproofing homes, but also for ultimately delivering the action plan. It doesn't mean that DOE is going to have to do all of the things in the action plan. It's just that DOE is responsible for coordinating amongst agencies and at the end of the day, delivering an action plan that can get voted on by the full task force. So if you go to the next slide, and this is just kind of, so everybody knows the responsibilities of the category leads. And we've had conversations with all of them previously, so hopefully this is not a surprise. But basically at the action team meetings, basically reporting out on ideas and progress for your action category. Outside the team meetings, that you may have to facilitate additional meetings, or maybe it's just an email exchange. And then ultimately making sure that one action plan is delivered, again, with input from others, but you're on the hook for making sure we have at least one plan for that category. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, long term, the plans are what the objectives are. We've identified categories, but we really want to have a plan with an implementable action that we can bring forward to the task force and the public and say, this is what we plan to do over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. If you go to the next slide. So today is really just about talking about the ideas, all those little blue dots. And maybe some of those blue dots become purple dots, which become action plans. But we don't need to have action plans done today. We're just trying to talk about ideas and get ourselves organized. So we go to the next slide. So the action team has 2 meetings. So this governance action team, we have 2 meetings before the next full task force meeting. So today's meeting, just hopefully everybody's getting a good sense of what each action team needs to do. And also, as I mentioned in the last slide, we hopefully discuss ideas for the potential actions. And then at the January meeting, which we'll set at the end of this meeting, we'll set that date. But at the January meeting, we want to actually come up with a list of ideas to share at the full task force. And for each idea, we're hoping that we can identify just a rough level of, what would the impact be, what would the level of effort, or what kind of time scale is it? Is it short, medium, long term? That kind of thing. So that's where we're trying to get to in January. So be thinking about that, that kind of structure as we have today's conversation. And then the last thing I'll mention is the public listening sessions. So You'll note that we will be presenting ideas to the task force in January for meeting number 2 before we've done public listening sessions. And that's intentional. We're not trying to say which ones, we're not trying to say in January that we've decided all of the ideas that are going to be action plans. We're just trying to give the full task force something to chew on, something to discuss. And then potentially those ideas could be used to frame discussion at these listening sessions that will be in February and March. So we're very conscious of not trying to solve all the problems before we even get public input, but I do think we're trying to get, we're trying to lay some groundwork so that we can have some productive discussions in February and March. And anyone else from the DC Water DOE team want to mention anything about the public listening sessions? Okay. Well, I think the idea is we're starting to plan and think about how those will go, and we will keep everybody, you know, in the action teams and task force up to date on what those plans are. But just know it'll be happening in February and March. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Salil to talk a little bit about the action plan template.
Thank you, Nick. Hey, Kim, can I share my screen?
Yes, absolutely. We'll give you. It's all yours.
Right, so I might need a little help here to figure out how to get to my screen here. I'm used to Teams.
Do we need to pass control to?
Yeah, I don't have a control yet.
Hey, can you allow Salil to have control of the screen, please?
Yes, just trying to get that over to him. 1 second.
Awesome. Thank you.
There you go.
You are now the presenters. Cool.
You're in charge.
So now I got to, okay. I'm trying to figure out how to bring my screen into this.
Well, while
Salil.
Salil
Yeah.
is getting that set, no, I was just
Do
gonna.
you see the share at the bottom of your screen?
Meredith?
Do you see the share at the bottom of your screen?
There we go. We see the meeting agenda.
Can you see the action plan?
We see the meeting agenda right now.
No, that's the wrong one.
So while Salil pulls that up, basically we have created a template for the action plans, and hopefully this will make what these action teams do a little bit less daunting, and just show you that it's only 2 pages right now, so that you know the end goal of where we're trying to get to, and it's a draft, and as we go along we might want to edit it, but that's what we're trying to show you. Whenever Salil can get it on screen. There we go.
Hallelujah. Cool. Well, thank you. Sorry it took me a while there. The way Nick explained it, we do have an action plan and we've got multiple categories. But within every category, we'd have a range of ideas. And those would be For example, this is category 4, which is sewer line backups and backwater valve. And one of the ideas under that would be expand backwater valve backflow preventer program. So we'd call that 4.1. So that could range from 4.1 to 4. However many ideas we have. We do want to capture the ideas, but what goes forward in the final action plan would only be those that are viable, because some of these ideas may be fantastic, but may not be viable. And some may be viable, but on a longer term, we can still carry forward with those ideas. But we want to definitely capture these. So in the action plan itself, the template developed, the first part would be an explanation of overview and implementation strategy. Now, the way this template's developed is it's designed to be short, and as just like an executive summary, the backup would be behind the template. So short implementation strategy and overview, then it goes to impacted wards in the city and the ANCs that are impacted or benefited by this action. Which agency would take lead in executing this? And what agencies would have supporting roles or have made commitments to assist? So just documents the team itself. Going into the background, a little bit of impact of this effort on the task force goal. How does this particular subsection 4.1 support the major goal of the task force? A little bit about historical content so that the person reading this action plan understands the need for this action plan, what's been done to date. So this is not like it's brand new. Some of these ideas, a lot of these ideas will already be existing in the different organizations. And we want to acknowledge the work that's been done to date. Then we come into where the rubber meets the road in terms of timeline. What happens? Who's the responsible agency? What is the action to be taken? And please, this is a straw man. These are not real actions and real agencies up here. This is just to give an idea. Nothing would go on this sheet unless there's been a discussion with the agencies and agreement on the work that has to be done and who's doing the work. But this just lists the timeline and who's going to do what action. In the end, it comes down to how much is it going to cost? What is the estimate of budget? And again, there needs to be backup, but the backup doesn't have to go in the executive summary, which is this action plan. There'll be a backup document in the back. And what would be using the budget for? And long-term budget requirements. And as Nick pointed out, DOE is listed all over here, but again, this is a straw man. This is not really a DOE request, but it'd be the agency responsible for asking for the budget and what year would that budget be needed, especially if it's a multi-year project. And the last piece in the action plan is acknowledging and documenting the public outreach that was done, the input from the public, and equity issues that were addressed through this idea. As Nick talked about, starting in January through end of February, we'll have a public outreach section. What were the comments received from the public as it relates to this idea? What additional engagement efforts were taking place? Remember, this action plan is developed at the end of year 1. So we've got an entire year to document all the work that's been done to get to that point. And then I don't want to minimize this because this is a very important issue, even though it's the last one on the list, is how does this action assist the vulnerable communities? How does this address equity in the city? Who does it help? So that's what captures what's involved in the action plan. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nick.
All right, great. Yeah, now we're gonna switch to the discussion portion. And so Adria, you can bring up the slides again if you have presenter access. So our plan essentially is, we've got 5 categories in governance and coordination, and we're just gonna spend about 12 minutes on each one. And we're going to ask the action category leads to kind of facilitate the discussion, talk about ideas, and go from there. So the first one, the first category is flood mitigation infrastructure projects. But I guess, maybe before we start, does anyone have questions about what we're trying to do with the action teams or the discussion today? Just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yes, Sal Bernardino. Quick question. I'm just curious. Is the voting intended to decide the priorities? And how do you assign, some sort of risk assessment factor to each idea? Is that also a vote? Or I'm just curious how that whole voting process by the agencies relates to priorities.
I can give that
Yeah, go ahead, Meredith.
a go. So I think ultimately the voting is going to be to approve the plans. So there will be lots of work that goes into deciding which actions get taken forward and what the input is. And I think the decisions, essentially the priorities, should come from these groups. The people who are really in the trenches working on this, deciding how we want to prioritize things. Ultimately, we want to come up with these plans, be presenting the ideas to the task force as we go along, getting feedback so that if there are things that are higher priorities, we work that into our plan. So at this point, we are planning on doing voting when the plans are finished to officially adopt them and just work through consensus as we go through this. I think I may have missed part of your question.
No, that answers it. Thank you.
Does it? Okay.
There was a second part to the question about risk.
Oh yeah, and we had talked about in these initial ideas, talking about what the level of effort is, what the level of impact is, and basically what resources are required, and then how much, what's the impact, what's the benefit. So risk can be considered in that. I don't think we explicitly talked about risk, but we could certainly include that in the action plans as well.
Thank
Any
you.
other thoughts from our team?
That's a good comment. So would we talk about risk mitigation by implementation of the action plan, or are we talking about risk of implementing the action plan?
No, again, related to priorities. There may be a
question. Sorry.
Yeah, there may be a bunch of actions, but the risk of something happening in one category or another may be different. I'm just wondering how that gets factored in.
This actually piggybacks on to the back of that. If the the task force comes together and picks these actions, all of them are going forward. We're not selecting which ones we implement and which ones we don't. If we agree, they all go forward, and I think that will result or get rid of the, which one is the either more risk or more benefit. They all go forward once selected.
Understood.
The other piece of this effort, I know Nick may have touched on this before, is every agency has been doing some excellent work in this area, and we do want to consolidate them into, so that this group understands all the work that's being done towards flood mitigation by different agencies, so that you can view all that work through one lens. Because there'll be areas that support each other, and there's synergy between different efforts, and that's what this task force is going to help us do. Find that synergy.
All right, any other thoughts or questions? Those were good ones.
I'm going to share my screen to support, to show the more details as Alan gets started on this one.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll just, so Demois is the agency lead on this, and Alan is kind of the staff member that is leading this action category. So I'll turn it over to you, Alan, to start the discussion here. And
Great. Thanks, Nick. And when will I have until, just so I can keep time for myself?
good question. Maybe shoot for so Kim or Adria, but maybe shoot for 11:40 for now, and then.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll be quick.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks Meredith for in advance for sharing your screen. But I'll get started while she's pulling that up. So my name is Alan Propp. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor in Demois. I'm here with my colleague, Chief of Staff Jonathan Rogers. I'll be talking about two specific categories here today. The first one, which I want to talk about now, is flood mitigation infrastructure projects. And so this covers a variety of things, and there were kind of two action areas that were listed in the document that was sent out in advance, or that was shown in the first meeting. So that first category is on prioritizing capital projects. So that kind of refers to the task force working with DC Silver Jackets to determine how to prioritize and seek capital funding for flood risk reduction projects. And that can include, infrastructure developed by the Army Corps of Engineers, Watts Branch Flood Risk Mitigation Report. You can see here infrastructure identified by DOE's Integrated Flood Model, identified by DC Drainage Committee, Buzzard Point, Fort McNair flood protection and trail infrastructure, Poplar Point living shoreline and levee, and then infrastructure identified in plans by Office of Planning's resilience areas. And then action 5.2 is kind of a little bit more specific, which is specifically focused on the P Street levee closure. So basically, currently it requires a sandbag installation during a flood. So this is about thinking about how to design it into a more permanent structure. So what I'm going to do, and I'll be taking notes in the background, but I want to basically open the floor up for folks who have ideas, and these can be as preliminary and high level or as specific as you want them. Today is about kind of generating the ideas. What comes later will be, prioritizing those ideas, fleshing them out a little bit further. But I want to open the floor up for anyone who has ideas for additional action categories to think about in this category of flood mitigation infrastructure projects. So as I mentioned, I'll be taking notes, but feel free to come off mute and give any ideas to the group. You can also drop it in the chat if for whatever reason you can't come off mute or you'd rather put it in the chat, but I would love to hear voices and ideas for flood mitigation infrastructure projects.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I can
If we
start
can-
off.
Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead, Meredith.
Let me just add a comment. So we lumped all of these kind of existing capital project ideas, into this one action. But I think it's quite suitable for us to be breaking these up so that each of the capital projects that are identified as a priority for being pursued are their own action, because there is a lot of work with each one of those. So I think that's one step we can definitely take. And then in terms of prioritization, there are just so many things that can be done. Limited resources, limited dollars to make these things happen. So we also want to determine how do we prioritize these capital projects to determine what do we start first, what comes next, or what gets done simultaneously. That's all for me right now.
Thanks, Meredith.
Just a question of clarification. This is AJ DDAT. We've said infrastructure identified by DC Drainage Committee. I don't know about the future, but the current DC Drainage, the effectiveness of the DC Drainage Committee is a little dwindling, in my opinion. Or can we put this all together as infrastructure improvement project kind of classification? Because with DDAT we have a few projects of that that fall into that category that would require to improve the existing infrastructures, the under capacity, old age, and the like.
Yeah, EJ, so I think I'm understanding your question correctly. So the answer to that would be yes. I also will note that the other section I'm going to be leading in a little bit later is on, let me make sure I get it right, flood mitigation planning and coordination, which is essentially like how do agencies and public work together to coordinate. And I have taken a note there that that's really good to know about the drainage committee to include in like better coordination between agencies. But I think in the meantime, any individual projects or specific projects would be worth noting here. Does that answer your question?
And EJ, it might be, I think some homework for you, but also anyone else is like, if you've got a list of capital projects that are flood related, just send them and we'll start to create that list. And it sounds like some of them for you, EJ, are like on a smaller scale, it's not a levee or a bridge, but like the smaller scale. But I think even having those, I'm sure you've got them listed somewhere in the capital project document. So
we do have them. Yes, they probably may not be as large as like the budget point effort we're trying to do, but infrastructure improvement works like in the Palisade area is a major undertaking. It's not a small project really.
Okay.
It is the infrastructure items are small in terms of they're all defined. We know what they are, but it's covering a large area and has a complicated issue.
Yeah.
This is what,
Oh, go ahead.
This is what I had looked at it previously, but at a later stage, this is a public space drainage work, and I left it, I believe, for DDAT to complete it. Is that right, Sunil?
I'm not familiar with the DJ, but I will follow up on that.
Yeah, there's a study done by DC Water as well on that previously, 2008, 2007.
I think the goal is if we at any point in time have identified a neighborhood or an intersection or a street that needs some kind of improvements or infrastructure and related to flooding, we should put it on the list.
Yeah. Okay.
Would that also
So-
include private projects receiving capital funds?
What would be an example of that?
Sometimes there are projects for mitigation, like the only thing that can come to mind is the wharf, where it has some tanks, some ballast tanks, as well as some levees there that are for that entire row going down the channel.
Yeah, maybe list them for now and then we can decide.
It's not totally funded, but they are receiving capital dollars.
Yeah, I think that would belong in this section. This is a pretty broad section, just flood mitigation infrastructure projects. And I think the only caveat here is that it's non-individual residential projects. So I think that would fall in this umbrella.
Well, there are residential projects that it does protect, residential buildings that it does protect. It is a commercial project, but the benefit is that entire corridor of the channel and M Street, which has residents right before you get to McNair or Buzzards Point.
Got it.
So the action plans are going to be for government action, where government has to take action and find funding to do projects. So if something's completely privately funded, I think we want to know about it as part of the big picture, but it may not be something the government takes action on.
I would agree if it was private funded, but if they do receive capital dollars for infrastructure improvements, and this would also go for some of your quasi utility companies that get that too, WMATA, DC, Pepco, excuse me, things like that.
Alan, Sandra, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Sandra Knight. I'm with the Climate Change Commission, DC Climate Change Commission. I have just a couple of questions. One is these, it says infrastructure identified. Does that mean things have been identified, or is that in the works, you know, by the Integrated Flood Committee model and the Drainage Committee?
I think a lot of it's in the works. I mean, for the Watts Branch infrastructure report, I think there's a couple of different alternatives that have been identified. We haven't done anything. We don't have any results from the integrated flood model yet, but it's kind of thinking ahead. Like eventually we will.
So we'll at some point this task force or action team will have maybe a list of these projects to look more thoroughly at. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think especially with this category, this is going to be one that, you know, on a yearly basis, we'll want to update and kind of like get task force prioritization. I think especially for this category, you know, with the capital dollars that need to be spent.
A second question I have then too is I think it's my understanding that this flood model is just getting started, right? It seems to me it could be a useful tool in helping look at all of these projects and prioritize the ones that provide the biggest bang for the buck. But I don't know if that's what the planning was.
Yeah, Nick, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's absolutely part of the vision here. I know I'm at time for this section here. So I'm just going to propose this. So one, I've taken a couple notes from the folks who did speak up, and thank you to those who did on the DC Drainage Committee effectiveness, which I can bring up later in a later section. And EJ, I think Salil is going to follow up with you on particular DDOT projects. And then a note here on private projects receiving public funds from Christopher Bailey. And thank you for your question, Sandra. If you have other things that you weren't able to say in the section, feel free to privately message me using the chat function here so I can add it to the notes. And obviously there will be more discussions about this in January, but if you want it noted now, feel free to message me and I can include it. But otherwise, I think I should pass it back to Nick to go into the next section.
Can I just ask Nick, is this the appropriate time to talk about what I would call more federally based projects? Or is that somewhere else?
Meaning like a large infrastructure project that
like
is of interest to the federal government.
Yeah, like the Federal Triangle flooding, the tidal basin, the 3 military installations that COG is doing the MIRR study on, the NOVA study that deals with the airport, which is kind of linked into Anacostia-based work. And some of these affect primarily federal facilities, but Federal Triangle affects DDOT streets and WMATA and utilities. And almost all of them have implications for adjoining properties. So I didn't know, I didn't know if this needed to be the federal wish list as well, because, and you're as familiar with those projects as I am. So
I mean, I think we should.
I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should. I think to the extent, I'm just thinking about like the military installation review and the NOVA study. I mean, to the extent that they have identified like an actual project that we can put on a list, let's put it on a list. I mean, like you say, I mean, a lot of it may even either has direct impacts to district government and residents, or like, second order, third order impacts. And let's have it on the list, and then we can prioritize from there.
Okay. Well, that was my list, so.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go.
In the essence of time, we're enjoying this robust conversation. I do want to keep us on time, Nick, so I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can.
Okay.
Do
Yeah.
you want to keep
yeah, you could just do
sharing
it on this slide. Yeah,
this
or on
document?
this. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the next category is, as we see here, regulations, legislation, compliance, and permitting. This one we're saying will be a co-lead between DOEE and DCRA. And we've got a couple of ideas listed here, but I'm going to pass it to Chris Bailey if you want to get things going here.
Thank you, Nick. Two things. One, I've made changes to the spreadsheet directly. I thought it was going to be a repository, but
Okay.
if I need to email some additional notes, I guess I would just forward them to you. But let's talk about number 6. So regulations, legislation compliance is something that will give almost immediate change to our agency operation and process, as well as DOEE and some other affiliated agencies. However, the implementation of that takes time. Modifying code, updating, getting approval, getting it ratified, and then sent into law, it does take some time. But a lot of the things is that we can do immediately is communication. Some of the things you see on your screen are just, what can be done and what is in the works now, and which are some of the changes that are happening. Communicating out these changes, the 500-year versus the 100-year, explaining that, and then modifying building code as well, or I should say construction code, because it affects more than just the building code. All will take time to implement, but these are some of the things that we're starting with. If anyone is not familiar with Appendix G, it's basically the resource, kind of direction and coordination between 2 district agencies to help identify, note, and find out where projects that reside in a floodplain, what they have to abide by. The plumbing codes, the mechanical code, electrical, building, existing, residential, all of those will take note from Appendix G and then have their identifiers noted, plan review, inspected, and then approved along with Citrus agency's buy-in. Are there any specific questions that someone would like to pose on these items? And I believe if you scroll down, I think there's one more. Can I scroll? There we go. So now, I'll have to leave DOE to talk to 6.6 because DCRA's jurisdiction ends when it comes to federal properties. But I also want to, just popped in my head, when it comes to regulation of public space, DDOT would be the agency that we would have to bring in to help facilitate any changes in their title in order to make sure that we can be holistic in the approach here. Are there any specific questions on maybe coordination, training, inspection, plan review, permitting?
I don't have a specific question, but I just want to note, obviously, DCBIA would be very focused on new legislation, new fees. obviously, again, we have stringent insurance requirements currently to build anything. And we have a long history of meeting with Director Wells and his team whenever there are proposals for new legislation and fees. I just want to make sure we have that opportunity so we can give you direct feedback and talk about what does and doesn't work when it comes to development.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and this is a great way to tell everyone that none of this happens in a vacuum. We're required to post our meetings, and I'm speaking for the CCCB, which is the Construction Code Coordination Board, as well as all of its technical advisory group meetings. We are required to post them on our website. DCRA does have a website in the calendar that shows when these meetings take place. They are open to the public. It is a digital forum, as well as when a TAG or a technical advisory group comes up with an idea to change a regulation, either be it a code requirement for restriction or betterment, or a fee change. All of that has to be approved at the board level of the CCCB, at which time it goes back for public comment, and public comment can then address any changes or anything that happens at that time. Once public comment goes through and gets voted on, it then gets sent to the office of the mayor for their legal team to go over it. Once they review it for legal sufficiency, as well as to present it to council, there's another chance for them to review over that regulation, that legislation, excuse me, not regulation, legislation at that point. So there are multiple times where the public has the ability to interject, propose, change, modify, and add in opinions, especially during the voting process at each of those stages when we come to making changes to the code. I can provide a link to the, I'll have to find it, but I can provide a link to the CCCB calendar if that's appropriate to put in the chat here. I mean, it's on our website, so it's pretty readily there.
Thank you.
Christopher, this is Salil. Thank you for that information. I have a quick question, something we run into with a lot of homeowners that call us regarding flooding.
Yes.
Where would we address rain-related flood water coming off one property, entering into another person's property and causing flooding, or running off a road and then entering onto a property causing flooding?
So those are two very good questions that have two different directions. So if we're talking about during construction, maybe excavation, site improvement, maybe regrading during construction, that actually is the construction code that would monitor that. It's practices, it's contractor needs and methods. It's also DOE with their stormwater and soil erosion. So there are several agencies that, and there's one more, and forgive me, I forget, there's another agency that addresses that. But during construction, DCRA and DOE would primarily be a hold of that. Once a permit is done, this is just property, two properties, and one just happens to drain onto another one. That's property maintenance. That is our construction administration wing of DCRA, which would be then property maintenance. Now, the third part is if it comes from a city or a non-private or district-owned property, then depending on what that is, it may be a DDOT, or it may be a DCRA or a federal back and forth that usually has to involve OGC, not OGC, OAG, Office of Administrative Hearings. I'm sorry, OAH. There's a lot of acronyms here. But that's where those interactions would happen. And there are codes as well as regulations for each of those. It just depends on which authority has jurisdiction based on who is the affected party and who is the contributing party.
So,
And that has been the purpose of the Drainage Committee. The
That's
Drainage
great.
Committee that's been active for a long time, kind of up and down, but that's really the purpose, is where to figure out, whose jurisdiction is it in and who has to take action.
That's correct. But generally, if that flooding is caused by drainage coming from the roadways, public roadways, then it normally comes to us and we deal with that. DDAT.
Meredith,
Thank
thank you. EJ, appreciate the input. Christopher, you also. I'm just thinking from the perspective of the poor homeowner who has no idea where to go. And we get the calls on them. So we need to find a way to get to it, but we'll get there. Thank you. This was
So that's water discharge and runoff from sites. This task and this is actually from a water event, such as raining, flash flooding, or flooding due to coastal. So we would not, I don't believe we would be taking on that responsibility of addressing that in this forum. But of course, DCRA can provide you information of where to go for certain answers or responses, because yes, we do handle private property during construction, but then there are, like I've mentioned, there are several other agencies involved for the other types of discharge. So, but for this task, I would specifically be looking at, like I mentioned, the water events.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think we need to schedule some independent, more time for these conversations, because we got quite a robust conversation going here. We definitely know this is important and valuable. My job is to keep us on time. So Nick, we have mapping and modeling next. We will definitely, Christopher, I'm sure you will do the same as Alan. If you want to put things in the private message or in the general chat, we will record those and make sure they get to Christopher. If we can facilitate in following up on any other questions, but mapping and modeling is the next category.
Yeah, and I do think we'll reiterate this at the end, but I think this is kind of hopefully whetting the appetite, and then we're hoping to get the ideas. We can send them via email. Maybe we'll try and figure out a way to have documents established for them, something like that. But anyways, so for the category 7, mapping and modeling, this is a joint DOE and DC Water activity here. And just to give an overview, we've talked a little bit about the integrated flood model. It's been in contracting for a while. Hopefully be awarded early in 2022. So that's something that's kind of like already happening, but we may want to add funds to do more kind of like infrastructure planning. Other ideas that we have here, installing rain gauges. So this could be anywhere, or even in the storm sewers, to give us kind of like real-time flow analysis that can either be used by emergency management or in kind of like our planning, modeling. Another idea here is, I know probably lots of folks from other agencies are familiar. It seems like anytime there's a project, we make this go around and we ask each other, hey, what are the latest models that you have? And we ask the Army Corps and we ask USGS, and it seems like there should just be a place where you could have all the latest hydraulic modeling, that's available for the district government to use. So that could be an idea. And then, the last one is, what happens after it floods? Each CMA does do some of this, but it might be good for us to have a protocol so that we can figure out where did the water, like how far did the water get, what homes were impacted. So just that way we both have a record of it, but also can make a better case to FEMA when we're trying to access disaster aid. And then, the last action on here is, our floodplain maps are from 2010. We have some new modeling, and so we should be making updates to those, and so but that's just a process. And in some cases, we would need to do some specific modeling in order to update certain sections of the city. Anyways, those are just ideas. Any of these seem more exciting, or are there other ideas? DC Water, I don't know if you guys want to jump in on this too.
If I could jump in on 7.2 for a second. This is a great idea. What we do need is to talk to the fire departments and the schools where we need buildings in different areas and strategic areas to install these and have access to them. So like we've got 4 in the city, and we definitely make that data available to the model. But if you want to put more, then we got to create this network between schools and fire departments. Locations.
Yeah, that's good.
Nick, this is Sandra.
Hey, Sandra.
Just a comment. These are really good ideas. And I know you've probably talked about it, but I mean, you're making this big investment in this flood model, first cost investment, but maybe a way to keep funding coming is also to make pick an agency. You're talking about a clearinghouse or something, but maybe it's DOE, I don't know, but that would be a cooperating technical partner with FEMA. That's a grant that allows the city or the to contribute not just data and information to FEMA for the maps, but also to be get the funding instead of it going to a contractor to make the flood maps. So if that's a possibility, then you end up being a FEMA partner, and your maps become kind of their maps. So it's just an idea.
I know we do get CTP grants, which are mostly for the purpose of modeling, but I'll double check with the team to make sure we're.
Yeah, a lot of those grants may not be for actually doing the modeling, but for outreach and helping support the modeling or providing data. But that maybe just a stronger, once you make this major investment, there might be an opportunity to have kind of a stronger relationship there in what becomes, quote, the regulatory model for the city and in conjunction with FEMA.
Yeah, that's great.
The one other thing I'd note is kind of for the last section, but since the federal government is responding to new federal flood risk management standards, I would hope that we'll continue to coordinate kind of your regulatory efforts with those so that they're comparable. We've also mentioned mapping things like the +2, +3 over freeboard value mapping as an option. The other thing I wanted, I really like the idea of a model clearinghouse, you know, so that we're not always in this who's got the latest, and somebody that could be kind of sifting through that. I'd at least like to encourage thinking about how perhaps a group like COG could be engaged in this simply because we share boundaries with Virginia and Maryland. And so they're doing studies, we're doing studies, and that information, I think, is overlapping. So I know Katie's on the call, maybe she has a thought on that, but that might be another way, and that could also support maybe some cost sharing as well.
I think those are great ideas, and your mention of I know the federal government is looking at the +2 and +3. I think there are places, you know, with our proposed updated regs, we're looking at similar things like that. So it might, you know, be in both of our interests to do any mapping modeling, you know, together on that. And I like the idea of COG being the model clearinghouse too.
Nick, I was just reviewing the list. USGS might have a role too in here.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, we've actually been discussing a little bit with HCMA too. So for the rain gauges, you know, and the stream gauges, there's the like full on USGS, you know, certified tech, right? Which would, you know, that would go into their stream network and stream stats, but there's also other things, kind of like lower tech, that, it's basically cameras, infrared cameras that kind of are just giving you like, where how high the water gets and where. So, there's kind of like different levels that we could be trying to go after the rain gauges and stream gauges.
Sure.
Hey, Nick, in regards to tax 7.2, kind of like piggyback on what you were saying, what USGS and what Salil was saying, there, as we learn, there's opportunities where we could shift, where I guess they're able to real time, depending on how things are looking, they could shift where the existing gauges are. So just making sure in this task that I know it speaks of installing, but just leveraging that existing resource, or understanding how that works, and what's the lead time if we were to take USGS on that offer. And maybe
Yeah,
it said, yeah, it was an email thread I saw. I can forward it to you, but regarding that they move around where the gauges are, and in particular for October, the last flooding incident, they move things more towards the Baltimore area so they can shift if needed, if we give them a lead time. I don't know what that lead time looks like, but it was something that Bill Lisker had.
That's right. I think it was more like
Mhm.
like not permanent stream gauges, but like they have the ability to deploy ahead of an event type of stream gauges. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the lead time is and where we could deploy, like maybe have pre-positioned potential areas that we already know about, but that is something to explore with the group.
And USGS also has a technology group that does a lot of experimentation, and they might be willing to experiment where we want to take gauges. And that doesn't go into the big database that Mesa talked about, that's official. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. And yeah, Sandra, I'm writing down your the Charlotte Mecklenburg. I think we've seen that. To get back with my team, we try and keep our eyes and ears peeled. All right, I think we can move to category 8, flood mitigation planning and coordination. I think is where we queue up Alan again.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody again. So this section on flood mitigation planning and coordination, I think is more, the section I talked about earlier was kind of the what. This section is more the how. So how do agencies, the public, non-district agencies coordinate for flood mitigation? And the ones listed here are, so 8.1, you can see designating attendees for district agencies to the DC Silver Jackets. And then 8.2 is kind of the broad category of coordinated public outreach. 8.3, I know was mentioned earlier, on the DC Drainage Committee, designated members and potentially formalizing or rebooting that group to be something more effective, something more useful. And then this last one here, 8.4, is on clarifying maintenance responsibilities for flood infrastructure, which are kind of owned and operated by a bunch of different agencies. But I'll just I'll stop talking here and open the floor up. And again, I'll be taking notes in the background, but would love kind of thoughts and ideas on ways that DC can better plan and coordinate both internally and externally for flood mitigation.
I really enjoyed the public outreach events that we were doing with DISB, that were conducted last FY year. There were 4 that were done for each quarter. That would be something, I'm not sure if that's still in the pipeline for this FY year, but I definitely think that we got a lot of engagement as well as with Flood Awareness Week. That was a great opportunity to engage with residents and making sure that ANCs are visibly involved. And I think that that was the first one. So there's opportunities there to continue with that.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
I think just related to that too, last year we did DC Flood Week in June. I think our plan is to do that again. And, I think we can also play up some of the work that the task force is doing at that, in June when we do that. So it's part of the coordinated public outreach that I think we can all be working on. And then, we mentioned the public listening sessions that the task force is doing, but really, that's a place where I think all the agencies related to flooding will be, it's coordinated public outreach in that sense too.
Great.
Just to add on to the last, or to 8.4, DCRA and DOE has always been coordinating our efforts to record, provide access to information. We have a repository of projects that are in the floodplain based on address. We do have lot and squares that do not have addresses that we are currently working to get them recorded so that we have a complete listing of every lot and square and address in the designated FHA, that the flood hazard areas, excuse me, so that we can notify and alert owners as well as people seeking to do repairs and things like that. So that's that outreach, that communication, and that collection of data is what we're working on to share so that both agencies have the ability to use it for this.
So this mitigation coordination thing, is it only about mitigating, or does it include response plans, or are we considering response plans separately?
We've got, I think the last category is emergency response in general.
Okay.
I think, feel free to bring your idea up here. I think the most important thing is if there is a need related to flooding, that we do an action plan for it, and we can figure out which category it goes in later.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
as some of you know here, we have tried to come up with some sort of a flood response plan and a communication plan along with it. How communications should be made with whom and how often, kind of thing. That remains to be brought to implementation, but it requires, it's not like an only DDAT kind of action. Where we are concerned most is about when floods occur beyond those kind of floods that we can improve through, we can mitigate through improving the infrastructures. We have to respond to those kinds of floods so that the traffic would be maintained to have flow. So in that endeavor, there needs to have a lot of communications, coordination works with multiple agencies. I mean, you can name everybody here to be involved in there. So I wonder if it is going to be part of this, or it is going to be like a separate category, which I think probably may be the case.
But
Nick,
it sounds
yeah.
like it sounds like you've got at least a good working draft that just needs to have everybody's buy-in. Is that kind of where you are on that?
Yes, it is very much focused on DDAT kind of geared to transportation, but
Okay.
I think it can be adopted to include others at the same time.
That's great. Thank you, EJ. And my inclination, Nick, we can talk about this after, is that that probably belongs in the next category more than this one, but
Yeah, maybe.
yeah. I know I have 2 minutes left here, so I want to make sure to give time to any other folks. And one other, I think, way of framing what I'm asking here is, are there gaps in flood mitigation planning and coordination, or folks who have not been included or should be included in a different way, or even existing efforts that should be synthesized that we haven't mentioned yet? So this means either everything's covered under these four, or the planning and coordination that DOE has been leading is outstanding, and no one has any any advice.
Well, I know, I mean, I'll just, yeah, we don't need to spend any time on it, but I do think action 8.4, especially identifying the P Street closure. I know we've heard from DPW that they're not sure that they're responsible for it. So just flagging that as like, we probably need to figure out as a district government who is erecting the closure at P Street. So
And looking in the chat, thank you, Sandra. I think both of your points are good, which is that this plan and coordination kind of has to speak to the existing plans, hazard mitigation, climate resilient DC, comprehensive, etc. So I think that's a great note, and maybe deserves its own action here, or maybe can fit it in the others. But I know I'm out of time. I don't want to get in trouble for going over my time. So thank you all. This is helpful. I've taken those notes. And again, feel free to chat me directly if you have other things that we didn't include.
great, thanks, Alan. Okay, so moving on to the last category, and we're going to try and save 5 minutes for closeout. So flood emergency planning, response, and recovery. I think we have HCMA as the lead for this, and for me, I don't know if you're, at least for now, going to be leading the discussion, or if there's someone else.
Yeah, I'll
See.
leave the discussion, but I'm having
Okay.
spotty internet, so if I get caught, Caroline Mejia is also on the phone from the Chief of Staff office as well, but I'm happy to jump in and kind of facilitate this category. As everyone knows, we're the central coordinating and planning agency before, during, and after an emergency. But some background about our role as it relates to this project, where I see some information that is needed to share, is with Ready DC, the Preparedness Campaign. Pretty much that campaign goes into like 5 concepts regarding being aware, taking action, making a plan, sharing resources, and staying informed through latest emergency alerts through Alert DC. It looks like this category speaks to one of that actual action, which I think is action 2, which is implementing an early severe weather warning system. We do have that capability. I think that we will look to this group to understand how we can enhance that. But then also a lot of the actions that are laid out here, to the last 2 being develop an MOU, and then I can't see the last one. Oh yeah, and then centralizing systems for flood alerts, flood complaints. Those 2 seem more so like an internal process that I know that we're working towards that we're still working through that. But as far as the first action, developing a visual platform real time, I would love to know what DC Water was, what that one was referring to. And then I would open up to the group to hear about ideas regarding this section on ways that we can improve the products that we have, as well as some of the emergency response that I believe EJ was referring to with the flood management that DDOT takes on.
Thanks, Amicia. Always good to work with you. let me talk about the first visual platform. So that's something we took on after the September 10th flooding event. For us, for our management staff and our operations staff to get a real-time view into where the problems are so we can dispatch crews very effectively and quickly. So what we have, and it's in place and we're still doing beta testing, but it's completed, is a graphic of the entire city. And as the calls come in, whether they come to us or they come to 311, they get displayed so we can find out the hotspots within the city. And they categorize by whether it's overland flooding or whether it's sewer backups, because those have two very different responses on our side from operational.
And with that capability, that technique, I mean, sorry, the product you're sharing, are you able to share that? Is that something that our operators would have to link in with you all in another way? How can that information be shared?
So that's our next phase that we need to talk about, because it's definitely more useful if it gets shared all the way across so everybody has access to it. So we got to work that out with our IT. We're also expanding it to our water systems. So in case we have a water emergencies, quality emergencies, whether it's a break. So it's once we develop the platform, we want to multi-use it for different things.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually came out of the September 10th, our after action report, where we needed to have eyes on where the problems were in the city. 9.2 is something else we've been working on too. We've been actually working on with View out of Canada. So to develop, what they would do is they look at if rainfall moving in and look at rain gauges throughout this region. As the rain gauges start providing information, they develop a predictive model as to how much rain is coming towards DC itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've asked them to do one, and still again in beta stage, because we want to test out the effectiveness of what they're giving us on a 2 mile square. So prediction, so that we know what area of the city would get the most rain. Once we go through with what Nick talked about earlier, with expanding the amount of rain gauges in the city, the accuracy of the model gets better.
Do you have more information? I know in the chat, a good point was brought up about just not being contradictory to what the National Weather Service, because that's when we're dealing with in response. That's our first call, and we set up the coordination to brief out stakeholders such as yourself or your EM, Dusty, and team regarding what we're seeing, what they're observing. So how is this something you all are just exploring at the early stages?
We are, because like we found out for September 10th, a cell over a particular area has a different impact than what national rainfall gives you information on your rains coming in. DC may get an inch of rain. We just need to get a little more granular in that information.
Yeah.
So that's where we're trying to get there. And we'll be happy to sit down and share with anybody on this call or not on the call about what we're doing.
That is very interesting. Last week we had internally we had one meeting with Dewberry talking about this casting, rainfall casting kind of. Is it something related to that? Is Dewberry by any chance associated with these things, Solen?
Dewberry is not associated with it. We're working directly with View out of Canada.
Okay.
Most consulting firms go to them for the data.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that we don't do redundant kind of stuff. If you guys have gone through this, it's superb.
One of the beauties of this task force concept that was developed was it allows us to share ideas so that we don't duplicate efforts.
Yeah.
And then build on each other's ideas. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, this is great.
That's great. Any other thoughts, any other ideas? I know we're still trying to link up with the centralizing of the flood complaints with DC Water. As far as any update at this moment, I would need to reach out to Dante and the operating team to understand where we are with that. But Caroline, you have any other thoughts before we close out? It's been we probably can go on about just the many things that we could be coordinating on and how we can and more information on this. But anything you have, Caroline?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly that in preparing to talk with everyone today, Ramisi and I were able to discuss the systems that we have in place currently. So we are building out our capabilities in the district's version of WebEOC, just called Core DC, which we've customized for our purposes. We also work on developing a lot of products with our Esri and ArcGIS contracts. So we're looking at how we have those resources and how we can use those to integrate a lot of the different information that's already being collected by DC Water, by DOE, by NWS, in addition to the HCMA information related to post-emergency canvassing operations following a flooding event similar to September 10th, to kind of integrate everything and have it in one place. So we hope that as we continue working with this group, that we can kind of plan out more how we can use that system and use it to ensure that everyone has access to the same information across the district to respond to resident needs.
Thank you. I think we're at our time.
Yeah, thanks for me saying, Caroline. I'll just put a big plug in for that 9.4, the centralized flood system. I think DDOT, DC Water, occasionally us, we get calls, and half the time they go to a different agency, and it can be frustrating for residents. So I think that'd be a great thing if we could come up with a plan for that, the task force.
I second Nick on that.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna speak up, Salil, but okay. Well, I forget who is gonna close us out, but whoever it is.
If we can
It
get
looks
access
like
to put those
Adria.
slides back up, we can assist in closing.
Looks like Adria is the presenter again.
There we go. Technology is amazing.
All the technology is coming up. I'll jump in there for a second on the last piece. If there's one thing that's going to call this a success, is something that the homeowners can look at and say, haha, this helped me. And that last piece that Nick had talked about is a direct assistance to homeowners. Where I get the most complaints from. All right, back out here.
Okay, Nick, if you want to take us through the homework.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about it, a little bit throughout, but the ideas that we've kind of gone through today, those were all the things that we could think of that were kind of in the works. But that's not the universe we know. We know some agencies have been working on things, and in some cases have like completed reports. So if you can share those, with us, we will kind of put it all together. And I think especially for the infrastructure projects, we got those lists, but also just any ideas that you have for the action categories. We're really not, the goal is not to just limit it to what you saw today. That was just hopefully to get the ideas flowing. But really by January, we want to come to these action teams with a list, and then maybe focus the discussion on what folks think are kind of like rising to the top as most important. So by January 3rd, we're asking you to send a list and reports, any efforts that you've been a part of that you think the action team could consider. And then lastly, we want to schedule the next action team meeting, and then we just want to pick like a set date, like Mondays at 10 or whatever it is for every month.
Hey,
So
Nick,
if you
on the
could
next slide, there's some candidate
Yeah.
times.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, next slide then. So if you could pull out your calendars while we're getting this slide. So we're suggesting that it be on the second week of every month because we'll have the full task force on the third week every other month. So here are our suggestions. Monday, Tuesday, or Friday, you see those times listed. So we're looking at, and specifically for the next meeting, January 10th, 11th, or 14th. So I guess is there anyone that's going to be like they just can't make one of those times or one of those dates? If you could either speak up or drop it in the chat.
I, for one, probably may not be able to make it at 10 and 11, but the 14 I can do.
Okay, and that's okay. I got it. Yeah, 14. All right, so now looking at, just because EJ spoke up, the 14th for one of those times.
Yeah, and just also because we've got the two action teams, I think today we're having the meetings on the same day, but I think we want to try to avoid that so that we have the action team meetings on different days.
Yeah.
To not take up too much brain space with what action team.
Okay, it looks like there's some good, I mean, the 14th looks like it could be good. And just pointing out that it's a Friday. Some people have different schedules on Fridays, but if it works well for everybody, we can go with that.
If it's a Friday,
Except for
earlier
Stacy.
in the day may work better than late afternoon.
Sorry, I missed the beginning part of that.
Sorry, if you're just hearing that it's a Friday, maybe earlier in the day may work better than late afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, we can think better in the morning. I agree.
Okay.
I think we can follow up. We will follow up with a doodle poll to the panelists to confirm that the 14th is a good date.
Maybe.
I
I hesitate with doodle polls. So I'm kind of leaning towards Friday in the morning.
Okay. All right. Sounds like it's set.
Yeah.
It'll be Friday.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
if the scheduling doesn't work, you can send us an email, let us know. But otherwise, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. This conversation was clearly robust. I see a need for more. I don't even know if we scheduled enough time on Friday the 14th. I feel like an hour and a half didn't do us justice, but I know that everyone has other things on their plate as well. So on behalf of the DC Flood Task Force, thank you for joining. Thank you for the robust conversation. Everyone have a peaceful and restful holiday, hopefully. And there is another meeting this afternoon. So we will get ready to prepare for that.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.